Dear Ambassador Sciala, dear Eric Lambin, dear colleagues, Patrick Hostad, Christoph Schneider, ladies and gentlemen. As President of Humboldt-University, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you all to Berlin and to our university today. Although this is the official opening ceremony of the KOSMOS Conference, you have already had a small but very inspiring event yesterday, which was called Icebreaker Speech, with a musician, pantomime, theater, and a lot of talking to each other. So I suppose you have had really a very wonderful evening yesterday. But it was not called kick-off, it was not named outset or perhaps point of departure, which would have fit to the nautical sub-theme of the conference quite well. It was called Icebreaker. The ice, ladies and gentlemen, is breaking, but not in a good way, as we know. The breaking and melting ice of the Arctic is a clear and very serious sign of climate change that is happening all around us, that does concern each and every one of us. Climate change has in various forms been a topic of concern here at our university for a long period, most notable as an integrative research institute on transformation of human environment systems, in short, ERI thesis. The core aims of the ERI thesis are a better understanding of phenomena like global climate and land use change, a dramatic loss of biodiversity and increasing inequality of distribution. This integrated research institute unites the natural sciences, social sciences, and humanities from a multidisciplinary perspective. Additionally, a forum for a sustainable university has been established years ago in 2016. Recently, our students have formed a local group of Fridays for Future movement, engaged the university in a debate on how to become climate neutral. So also the climate conditions today in this room, so they try also to put that into account. Our scientists and several of our teaching staff are organized under different labels like Wednesdays for Climate and Scientists for Future, and are, for example, promoting a self-regulation of European flights and inner-European flights. And you will meet some of our researchers focusing on climate during the next days, or in case of Christoph Schneider and Patrick Hostad, even within the next few minutes. This is not, however, only a conference on climate change. Navigating the sustainability transformation of the 21st century aims for a broader view with the United Nations sustainability goals in mind. These 17 goals are independent and cannot be reached independently. The same is true for discussions of the goals. Everything is connected, as Alexander von Humboldt put it, whose upcoming 250th birthday we are commemorating this week. Alexander was a true interdisciplinarian. He had a background in geology, but was also fascinated by and skilled in geography, astronomy, biology, and several other disciplines. I am sure you will agree with me when I say that in the specialized research environment of today, it seems nearly impossible for a single person to emulate the likes of Alexander von Humboldt. That is why we as university had conscious efforts to strengthen transdisciplinary research projects for more than 1 decade, and decided to concentrate our efforts on that, bringing together people from different faculties, encouraging the founding of interdisciplinary centers, and, for example, also research institutes. Today, the collaboration across boundaries is deeply rooted, especially in our university's mission. What we can learn from Alexander is his openness to new approaches, to different angles, and to other people's findings. Alexander had a vast net of communication. He would write thousands of letters to hundreds of people and received almost double that number. If there was a new aspect to a topic he was pounding, he would make a clipping and add it to his notes. Alexander's methodology has been compared to a discoverer in a sailing boat, moving perhaps from island to island of knowledge. Both pick up new goods, maybe trade them for something of their own. The real benefit, though, lies for him especially in exploring the connections they make between the islands of knowledge. What was before an isolated spot of research area suddenly gets connected to a whole network of knowledge, in his case, respectively. This willingness to learn from others and interact and cooperate with researchers from different fields would later be called interdisciplinarity. This KOSMOS conference is a great example for an interdisciplinary approach to global challenges and truly convey the spirit of Alexander von Humboldt. Our university's namesake can be a model in today's world, also in another perspective as well. Alexander was a brilliant communicator. His expeditions and findings were never intended just for the informed few. He, for example, managed to make a really large public lecture series to talk of the town. Everybody wanted to attend, the noblemen of the emperor's court as well as the working class and low-borns. In contrast to the university's lectures, the public lectures were also open to women. With today's media frenzy, it is of course much harder to attract a large audience, but it's my strong belief that people are still very much interested in state-of-the-art research. We should find together ways to talk to them in a clear and very, on the other hand, precise way. And then, even more important, to listen to what they have to say. Especially in this sense, I'm very grateful to the organizers of the planning several open and interactive formats. The Treasure Quest is one I am especially looking forward to. It combines an experimental mindset in research and presentation with a dialogue with the general public. It is a truly Humboldtian thing to do, and I can't wait to see the results. Before now handing the microphone over, allow me to take a minute and thank the people who made this conference happen. Your dedication was remarkable. You have done an amazing job. I cannot name all of you, or I will ruin the schedule right away. But be assured that your work has not gone unnoticed. There is, however, one person I want to single out, because none of this would have happened if it wasn't for him. Christoph Schneider had the idea for the topic of the conference and put an immense amount of time and energy into realizing it. I wholeheartedly thank you and hope everything will turn out the way you expected it. And ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a very successful, inspiring and fun conference. Have a great time in Berlin.
Magnifizienz, liebe Frau Kunst, Your Excellency, Ambassador of Peru, Mr. Sciala, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, good morning, everybody. It was a real pleasure to meet with Elmer Sciala, Ambassador of Peru, for the first time in the Berlin-Brandenburg Academy of Sciences, where he gave an inspiring and insightful account on Alexander von Humboldt's footprint in Latin America. I actually immediately thought that such perspectives should not be missed out at our KOSMOS conference that links Alexander von Humboldt to today's global challenges in sustainability sciences. Excelencia, embajador del Perú, querido señor Sciala, estamos encantados de que nos abra una perspectiva latinoamericana y una visión alternativa de Alexander von Humboldt a nuestra conferencia. Es un placer y un honor que usted se una a la ceremonia de apertura de la conferencia KOSMOS. I think I have to repeat in English for some of you. Your Excellency, Ambassador of Peru, dear Mr. Sciala, we are delighted that you are opening up a Latin American perspective and an alternative view to Alexander von Humboldt to our KOSMOS conference. It is a pleasure and it is an honor that you are joining the KOSMOS conference opening ceremony and actually also in your specific function as the representative of all Latin American ambassadors in Berlin. So the floor is yours.
As Peruvian ambassador in Berlin, I was taught that you should, in Germany, always begin in German. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, guten Morgen. Dear President of the Humboldt-Universität in Berlin, Professor Dr. Sabine Kunst, the Director of the Geographical Institute of the Humboldt-University of Berlin, and mastermind and hard co-worker of this KOSMOS conference series, Professor Dr. Christoph Schneider, dear Professor Lambin, ladies and gentlemen, dear scientists that work in the multifaceted fields that were touched upon by this great 19th century German, or I would say rather Prussian mind, Alexander von Humboldt. As chairman of the group of ambassadors of Latin America and the Caribbean in Berlin, it is for me a great honor and pleasure to accept this very friendly and honorable invitation of the Humboldt-University of Berlin to take part in the opening of this important conference of the series KOSMOS Readings, KOSMOS Lesungen, in honor of Alexander von Humboldt, whose anniversary we celebrate this year. Alexander von Humboldt is world-renowned for his tremendous contribution to knowledge and science. Although it is almost impossible to divide in a competent way his legacy, due to the sheer size and diversity of it, allow me to try my humble hand on it. I will propose to you to see Humboldt's work in three broad areas. First, a purely scientific one, which is defined by the countless species of plants, insects, birds, animals in general that he collected, named, and classified, as well as the many measurements of all kinds that he took. This contribution alone is enormous and of a paramount importance. It would have been sufficient for Humboldt's well-deserved place as the most important scientist of the first half of the 19th century. Secondly, there is his legendary personal commitment to discovery and to science and knowledge. His tireless and meticulous quest for unveiling the unknown, something that was not always exempt of dangers and personal risks. Without Humboldt's example, and we must also here point out, and without the extensive correspondence with which he made his discoveries known to his contemporaries, perhaps we would not have had scientists of the size of Charles Darwin, Henry David Thoreau, George Perkins Marsh, John Muir, and many others who on Humboldt's path approached the study of nature with the same passion, enthusiasm, and tenacity. And the third area, and possibly his most relevant legacy today, in our days, is his worldview, Weltanschauung, that all things are connected to each other. As already pointed out by Madam President of the University of Humboldt, for him, everything was interaction, Wechselwirkung. Only in this order of ideas can we find an explanation, for example, to his conclusions about the negative effects on water resources and on the capacity of the soil to retain this pressure resource caused by the indiscriminate deforestation he observed in 1802. Yes, 1802, in the Venezuelan tropics. His limpid logical discourse with which he united phenomena of a complex nature stands testimony to the holism in Humboldt's cosmogony. In my humble opinion, Alexander von Humboldt was a century ahead of what later became known as the systems theory, developed by von Bertalanffy, Wiener, or Talcott Parsons, and today firmly anchored in the epistemology of science. The man whose anniversary we are celebrating this year, since the beginning of this year, was a world explorer in the broadest sense of the word. He rediscovered America for Europe. He traveled to regions of the American continent, which soon would become new, young, and promising republics. His diaries, full of notes on physical geography, drawings and descriptions of these American minerals, plants, and animals, are known all over the world. But his writings and critiques, collected in various diaries also, about the social conditions he found in Hispanic America are also of a great importance. Nonetheless, he is little known for his criticism of negative effects of colonialism in America, slavery, and the miserable working conditions he found in some places, particularly in mining activities. As a son of the European Enlightenment, Humboldt could also be described as a precursor of the Latin American movements of independence. Describing Humboldt's notes on this matter, Walter Wernicke writes, and I quote, "Not only was the society of Spanish colonial Latin America hierarchically structured and deeply divided as a whole between Indians and non-Indians, or whites, let's say, but the white part of that society was also divided horizontally according to the wealth and privileges, and vertically according to Spanish or Creole descent. The Spanish government prevented thereby a courtesan society from becoming a civil society. Humboldt, however, did not advocate an overthrow. Rather, it is symptomatic that he dedicated his essay on New Spain to the Spanish King Charles IV, despite the clear criticism of the colonial system. End of quote. This view is very similar of that of the Juntas Defensoras de los Derechos de Fernando VII. That is, the juntas, the communities that originated in the colonial cities such as Mexico, Bogota, Caracas, or Buenos Aires, to defend the legitimate rights of King Ferdinand VII in the aftermath of the Napoleonic invasion of Spain. However, after his restoration, this very same Spanish king declared these juntas illegal, and their members, who were actually loyal to the Spanish crown, were persecuted and arrested. These events paved the way for the independence of Latin America. The Grito de Dolores, the Cry of Dolores, in Mexico. The military campaigns of Simón Bolívar or José de San Martín were not least due to the social conditions in these countries, which Alexander von Humboldt had already critically noted. Allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to touch upon another topic, both visionary as well as very current, which was taken up by Humboldt, and that is slavery. For him, slavery was not natural. It was unjust and illegitimate. He regarded it as the greatest evil of mankind, as is revealed in his diary on Cuba dating 1804, discovered rather recently at the Jagiellonian Library in Krakow by Professor Ulrike Leitner. What an admirable son of Europe Humboldt was. We must not lose sight that from the 17th century and up to the 19th century, slavery and trade of slaves was an essential part of the relationship and commerce between the European reigns and their colonies in Africa, America, and Asia. Nor can we oversee that the Constitution of the youngest American nation, which was born in 1776 under the name of the United States of America, does not condemn or abolish slavery, although it solemnly declares human equality to be a self-evident truth. Slavery was very much the state of affairs in Humboldt's times. His interest in slavery in the Americas begins with the Revolution of Saint-Domingue. This revolution is important for his work and for the region, and his comparative history of slavery. Haitian Revolution from 1791 to 1804 was the first African-American revolutionary movement that culminated in the abolition of slavery in the French colony of Saint-Domingue. And in 1789, and the proclamation of the First Empire of Haiti, the first independent nation in Latin America. The Haitian Revolution was followed by other revolutions of independence in Latin America. They also soon followed the abolition of slavery, and thus ending the suffering and human degradation of some 13 million slaves. Ladies and gentlemen, human trafficking and slavery are a crime of immense proportions, and today it is more present than ever. Their grounds are, as they were in Humboldt's time, economic greed, corruption, and a full contempt of humanity and of human values. According to the United Nations, today slavery affects more than 40 million people worldwide. And it is estimated that this activity, this gruesome activity, generates profits of more than 150 billion US dollars. So let us look back once more to this wise Prussian man, and let us go over his notes and conclusions. Let us learn from him, and together let us fight in a resolute manner, also against slavery, characterized more than 200 years ago as an abominable and inhuman behavior. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your inspiring talk. The social is an integral part of sustainability sciences, and we have to acknowledge this. I gladly acknowledge that without the help of the Integrative Research Institute on Transformation of Human Environmental Systems at Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin, we would never have been able to get this conference on stage. And this is, there are so many people at IRE Thesis that have been contributing to the preparations in the one or the other way, so that I really thank this important transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary institution at Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin. I'm gladly a member of it as well, and I now ask the co-director of IRE Thesis to give a couple of words to the audience. Patrick Hosted, please come on stage.
Good morning and a very warm welcome, literally, by the IRE Thesis, the Integrative Research Institute on Transformations of Human Environment Systems here at Humboldt-University. It's a great pleasure being here, and we shouldn't forget it's both. We are celebrating a birthday of Alexander von Humboldt. At the same time, we have a serious scientific conference here. So let me try to provide a few linkages between that conference on the one hand, and on the other hand, how Alexander von Humboldt, if he lived today, would probably think about creating innovative research. So let's assume he was among us. So how would he translate his research from past times into the 21st century? A few hypotheses. You may agree or disagree. So first of all, I think he would love the SDGs. I guess he would be one of the head scientists probably at UN creating those. Maybe a bit differently, but nevertheless, he would be in favor of that. Having said that, he would spearhead science and social ecological systems research, probably together with Eric Lambin and some others. But otherwise, he would be intrigued to put everything that he's doing research about into its cultural and socioeconomic context. So he will never work on natural systems alone or social systems alone. He would link it, just as he did at that time. Secondly, I think he would work always across scales. He would use extensively global data sets that he didn't have at that time. Personally, I think he would love satellite imagery, but I'm a bit biased there. He would probably, as at that time, not sleep very much. He only used 4 to 5 hours per night, which is great, because for him it was almost a 24/7 mission. So during that time, he would work extensively during daytime here, work at the university, but also do his interviews with people outside, interact with society, do interviews in Brandenburg to find out about what is the failures of the common agricultural policies of Europe. He would find out about how people in Berlin consume and be critical about that. Fly less, eat less meat. I'm pretty sure he would engage on that. At the same time, during the night shift, he would Skype in with Eric and others in the Americas, with his colleagues in East Asia and Australia, and harass them with his ideas and questions to get a better idea on, first of all, how other cultures feel about his ideas, and secondly, how that links, how we see all these international linkages between policies here and there, between science here and there. That would again create an incredible knowledge base, and I'm pretty sure he would work towards transforming Earth and science and policies towards a more sustainable world. And probably he would find good ideas about how to, at the same time, transform, for example, agriculture into a sustainable endeavor or more sustainable endeavor and feed 10 billion people in 2070, say. Now, that's about science. University systems, that's something he was interested in as well, of course. So what would he do? What would he suggest for today's universities? I think, first of all, he would use his great research for also excellent teaching. So teaching is at the core of the university. So involving young scholars that are interested in really doing interdisciplinary research, different research than probably in the past, that would be one of his main endeavors, beyond the disciplinary boundaries, overcoming the speechlessness that we still have between some disciplines. And we shouldn't forget, probably, his brother would be the German Minister of Education and Research. So there wasn't much Prussian laugh between them at that times, but I think today they would sit together over a Berlin beer or some of these fancy sustainable drinks we have here, and would discuss, even if they didn't like each other too much, probably. And Alex would make suggestions to Wilhelm, and one of the suggestions would be, yes, go for excellence in the disciplines, don't lose that, but at the same time, also take care that interdisciplinarity is something that we have institutionally built into the universities. So schools that are at the interdisciplinary level would be something that would be quite normal in every German university and beyond, I'm pretty sure. So finally, he would be all over the place in the social media. So I don't think he would write the amount of emails that he wrote in letters at that time. He would rather go, I don't count it. He would go any social media, I guess. He would engage with the public, he would engage with policies. He would provoke, in a positive way, politicians. He would also try to not neglect what's going on in the world in terms of the nationalist debate that we see these days in the US, in Europe, in Russia, in China. He would engage on that, because that plays, at the end of the day, a major role on what we can achieve in terms of transformative science. So he would do that. Truth against storytelling. Finally, he wouldn't become a politician. He would stick with science, for sure. But he would enjoy interacting, and he would really have a good time, I guess, having all the problems in his face that we have today. So with that spirit, let's take that on, have a great conference for the next 2 days, and looking forward to great results of these 2 days.
One more minute until we come to Eric Lambin, and this is the postdoc network of IRE Thesis has prepared something which actually is a survey that you should join in, and Cecilia is going to introduce you to this very briefly.
Welcome everyone from my side as well. My name is Cecilia Fries. I'm a postdoc at the IRI Thesis in the Geography department here. And today I'm representing the IRI Thesis Postdoc and Young Researchers Network. And we've come to ask for your help with the survey that we are conducting at the moment around one of these key challenges that we see when we are working inter- and transdisciplinarily, namely around scales and how we bridge scales. When we come together from many different backgrounds, we have different approaches to spatial, temporal, institutional scales, but we might also have very different understandings of what this concept actually means. And we think it's important to start a discussion and a conversation in this field on sustainability science and how we can come to terms with those challenges, but also really point to the solutions. And we're really looking forward to Eric Lambin's talk in a second on scaling solutions for sustainability science. So the survey, you've all received a little flyer in your conference bag Christoph sent around the link, will also be in the foyer in a table where you can come and fill in the survey on the spot. And at the end of the conference, we will draw a lot between those who are willing to participate in a small lottery, and will hand out a couple of books on a concept of telecoupling that we're working a lot with here at the Humboldt-University IRE thesis. Yeah, so enjoy the conference, and thanks a lot in advance for your assistance with this. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we had a great icebreaker last night with an inspiring talk, and we are going to have another, I guess, inspiring talk this morning after these really exciting words by Frau Kunst and Mr. Scialla, given by Eric Lambin. And I should introduce the speaker very shortly. We're a bit over time, so I'll keep it short. Eric has bachelor and master degrees in geography and philosophy, which he received from University of Louvain, and a PhD in geography also from Louvain in Belgium. He became actually assistant professor at Boston University in 1991, became professor at the University of Louvain in 1995 already. He's been the chair of the International Scientific Land Use and Land Cover Change program for quite some time, from 1999 to 2005, and then finally became fellow at the Center of Advanced Studies in the Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University. He received the Franquil Prize, which is the most important prize in science in Belgium. He became professor at Stanford University, so he has two affiliations now. Was awarded with the Volvo Environment Prize, which is the scientific world's most respected environmental prize. Maybe the only other one which might be even more respected is the Blue Planet Prize, which he received 2019. Then finally, Eric Lambin holds an honorary degree, Doctorararum Naturalium Honoris Causa, from the Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Sciences of Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin. And I think this is the reason why you have been asked to come here again. And I'm so glad that you feel connected to Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin and that you're joining us for this conference. And we are really looking forward to your contribution. Eric, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Christoph, Mrs. President, Excellency, dear colleagues. The world that von Humboldt explored for us is under threat, as you all know. And what can we do about it? Let me try to address that question. And let me start with that quote from former President Bill Clinton, where basically he says that nearly every problem has been solved somewhere. But the real issue is how to replicate that solution elsewhere. That's very much the issue I'm going to try to address today. And I'm not just showing that quote to remind us that there was a time when US presidents were actually able to articulate very coherent thoughts. Sorry, Mr. Ambassador, it was not very diplomatic. Okay, so my premise is this. First, a sustainability transition is required. I don't need to convince you about that. Most solutions are already known. And not only known, but they are already implemented with success somewhere in the world. So the real issue is upscaling, how to create this change at scale. One of my colleagues at Stanford in the business school is a specialist in organizational behavior, published a very nice book called Switch, How to Organize Change. And what he argues is that the very big complex problems can only be solved by a sequence of small solutions. There's some asymmetry between the size of the problem and the size of the solution. So what do we mean by small solutions? When a solution is small, when we can act within the scale of competence of the actors involved, of these stakeholders. Small solutions are local, therefore they are better understood by the stakeholders. They're implemented within a very dense social network. There's trust between these actors. They are more easily fine-tuned to the local conditions because it's a small solution that you apply locally, and they are easily enforced. What does it mean for forest conservation, for example, which is my field. Yeah. We know a range of very successful approaches to reduce tropical deforestation. They've been implemented, they work. Some are part of what we call the public governance. They are led by government, protected areas, community forests, etc. Others are more technological. They involve sustainable intensification. And now a new wave of solutions belong to what is known as the private governance. Now they are led by private actors, whether NGOs, private companies, other private actors. We have plenty of evidence that these work. Let me show you just a few examples from my own research. One is payments for ecosystem services. We did the first randomized controlled trial to evaluate in a very rigorous way whether these payments are effective or not. We went into Uganda. We selected randomly 120 villages, and they were randomly assigned into treatment and control. Treatment, we went to each of these villages, and we offered to the farmers a payment of $26 per hectare and per year if they would sign a contract where they would commit not to clear trees. Control villages, we don't do anything. We just observe what's going on. We do that for 2 or 3 years. We monitor with high-resolution remote sensing, change in tree cover, very high level of detail. We can count every tree. After 2 or 3 years, we know that first, only a third of the villagers in the treatment villages actually signed the contract. It's purely voluntary. They were not obliged to do it. But even though only a third of them signed, the rate of tree cover loss in the treatment villages was dramatically decreased compared to the control villages. 4% tree cover loss compared to 9% in the control villages. We reduced deforestation by more than half just by this very, very low level of payment. That works. Now, this is being replicated elsewhere. Another type of small solution that works is the eco-certification. You just define a sustainability standard to some commodities. You audit that and you communicate that to the consumers via an eco-label. We've done a lot of evaluation of these schemes, and in most cases, they seem to work. Just one example, again, very rigorous study design. We take a random sample of about 100 farmers in Colombia, in the province of Santander, that are certified for coffee production using the Rainforest Alliance certification. And we pair every farmer that's certified with a neighbor that's not certified. And we make sure when we select the neighbor, the control group, that they have the same farm size, same level of education, same location because they are neighbors. So we control for all the confounding factors. So we can really control the performance of the certified versus the non-certified farmers. And if we compare, we see that if you're certified in green, you have much, much more increase in tree cover compared to your non-certified neighbor. That works, simply because the standard obliges the farmers to maintain tree cover along rivers, on steep slopes, to practice agroforestry. So this is really simple and efficient. Small solution that works. Third example, a number of companies are making commitments for sustainability. We studied many of them. That's one example. Woolworths, it's a major retailer in South Africa and Australia. And simply what they did, they committed to all the farmers to whom they are sourcing their fruit and vegetables to provide some technical advice year after year on how to adopt better land use practices. They just send these auditors, very competent people. They just spend half a day with each farm, and they do that every year. That company gave us access to all their audits, almost 1,000 audits for more than 200 farms over a period of 8 years. So we can analyze all this audit data and compare these to a control group that were not in that system. And again, we see a major impact for a number of, so it's a very rigorous study, a panel analysis, but for all the practice that are required and some very technical practice that improve the sustainability of farming, we see much better performance for the group that was part of this this advising system compared to the group that was not part of the advising system. Very, very cheap, small solution that works. And finally, last example, at the national scale, we've studied for many years now what we call the forest transition countries. A few, generally small countries, have managed to shift from net deforestation, a major decrease in forest cover, into net reforestation. In just 1 year or two, they've been able to reverse their deforestation trend and actually increase forest cover. That's the case with Vietnam in this case, Costa Rica, Bhutan. We've studied a number of these countries. So that works. So we know how to do these things. And it's successfully implemented in some place, but just in this place. So now, how can we upscale these successful experiences? This is needed. I mentioned payment for ecosystem services. There are about 550 PES schemes in the world now, so that's quite good. But in fact, they only represent the amount of money being transferred for these payments for ecosystem services only represent 0.1% of the value of international trade. Really almost nothing, very, very small impact. There are many schemes of eco-certification, but typically their market share is between 2 to 22% for the most successful program. And then it stagnates there. It's very hard to go beyond 20% market share for these programs. There are a number of private companies with sustainability commitment, but really only about 300 are really committed with concrete action for sustainability compared to about 80,000 multinationals in the world. Again, it works, but a small fraction of the world. And finally, yes, there are these forest transition countries, but really just 5 or 7 of them, and mostly small countries. So how can we scale that up? As some NGO mentioned, if small is beautiful, big is necessary if you want really to transform the world and into a more sustainable path. Okay, what do we do? Well, as the Gates Foundation do, they look for potentials, things that work, and then they try to figure out how are we going to do things up. This question of upscaling has been addressed by many different disciplines and experts. For instance, where I'm spending part of the year in the Silicon Valley, you can be sure that there are a number of gurus of upscaling because every little innovator is just obsessed about how is my iPhone, my app, my little thing here that I'm developing going to scale up and really sell very widely. And most of the work for upscaling of technological innovation assumes that the upscaling potential mostly depends on the nature of the innovation. Not so much of the process of scaling, but does the innovation hold a series of attributes that make it scalable or not? These are the criteria. I have no time to go through that. There's also a lot of work on upscaling within organization. Private business, public institutions, universities, you try to promote some innovation, new ways of teaching, new ways of organization. Can it upscale through my organization? And then that school of thought, most of the thinking is about the level of acceptance of that innovation within the public that's affected. There's something known as the formula for change, where basically, in order to upscale some innovation, you need to, at the right-hand term here, the level of dissatisfaction with the current state of things times the vision for the ultimate outcome, where do we go, the big vision, the long-term vision, times the first step, which would be the small solution that you implemented in order to realize that vision. So these 3 factors need to be greater than the resistance. There will always be resistance to change, but also you have a factor related to the trust between stakeholders. If you have a high level of trust, it's much more likely that your innovation will penetrate. That's why small local solutions are easier to implement, because there's more trust in a local community than in a very large heterogeneous society. Political scientists have also been thinking a lot about this question of upscaling, and one of the major theories is from a guy known as Kingdon. he calls his theory the multiple stream theories. His idea is that in order to upscale solution, you need a window of opportunity that's formed by the convergence of three independent streams. One stream is known as the problem stream. The problem that you try to address needs to be very salient, needs to be very widely perceived, very well recognized and understood, because there's some crisis or some good communication going on. Then you have the policy stream. A set of solutions needs to be available, developed, piloted, tested, proven. And then you have a third stream, which is the policy stream. You just need these policy events, a new election or some political crisis, that suddenly the leaders say, okay, let's act on this issue right now. And it's only the convergence of these three streams that creates this window of opportunity where suddenly you can upscale your innovation. What about sustainability? That's really what we are interested in here. So my claim, and I've been working on this issue for a couple of years now, is that looking at these success stories in the past, there are mostly two upscaling or amplification mechanisms that can create a tipping point of adoption for innovation related to sustainability. One is when these innovations are integrated into public policies that will support, endorse, or even make mandatory these standards. Or second, when these innovations are adopted as supply chain commitments by very large companies that control a very large market shares and have a very, very wide supply chain. Therefore, they have an influence on a very large fraction of the world. Let me give you an example of these two processes. First, let's look at the role of public policies in producing countries first. Well, we see a number of examples where purely voluntary sustainability standards and eco-certification standard has been at some point fully or in part integrated or explicitly endorsed by a government. The nicest example I know is from Bolivia, where at one point the Bolivian government was revising its forest code, and they realized that a few of the concessions on public land, public forest, were FSC certified, FSC Forest Stewardship Council. And they say, well, rather than reinvent the wheel, let's just copy-paste most of that standard into a forest code. And now, rather than applying to 5 or 6 concessions, now it's become law, and therefore it applies to all concessions. Big, sudden upscaling, because it's endorsed by public policy. We find similar examples in Mozambique with the Better Cotton Initiative, which is now part of the national regulation on cotton cultivation, and other examples, including in Peru, where there's not the FSC that's fully integrated to policy, but the forest concession holders that commit to be FSC certified have a reduced lease payment to the government for using these public forests. So there's another way to facilitate the upscaling of these innovations. So these were for producing countries. Now, consuming countries, the importing countries of these commodities can also enact some public policies that will facilitate the upscaling of these innovations. And the EU, for instance, has a number of public procurement policies. The EU Forest Law Enforcement and Governance and Trade is the major directive to prevent illegal trade of timber, is recognizing eco-certification criteria, FSC and PEFC, as proof of legality in order to comply to that policy. The US, the Lacey Act, the EU Renewable Directive also recognize a number of voluntary sustainability standards to comply with the directive. So this is just showing that if you impose through law some of these innovations that have a very low market share, suddenly you bring them to scale because you mandate all the producers, importers to comply with that standard. One way to put it is that sustainability can only become a norm when legal compliance ensures implementation. Public policies, public government remain the institution with the greatest power to mandate, support, fund the implementation of these innovations. The second major mechanism is when private companies that control a very large market share, very large supply chain, integrate some of these standards into their own internal codes of conduct via sustainable commitment for sourcing practices. And we see a lot of that. Something like 450 large multinationals today have made a commitment to zero deforestation in their supply chain. And more than 85% of these companies actually implement these commitments just by saying, well, we'll only buy eco-certified palm oil, soil, timber, meat, whatever. So again, suddenly you upscale these standards that were stagnating with a 5% market share, and now the market share increased dramatically because if you want to sell to these major companies, you have to comply to that standard. We find many examples of that, also many examples of companies making commitments like Starbucks. Now they just say, okay, we just buy fair trade coffee. IKEA say we'll have 100% of our wood FSC certified, all our cotton BCI certified, big upscaling mechanism. Again, as a test of that, we took a random sample of 450 companies in the food, wood, and textile sectors, and we analyzed all the sustainability commitments. About half of them had some commitment, and of that group, a third of them were fully relying on external voluntary sustainability standards in order to implement their commitments. So they just subcontract somehow the implementation of their commitment to existing innovation just to help them to upscale these standards. What's key? A key element of complexity in this upscaling mechanism is the need to look at the kind of multiple stakeholders involved in these processes. Another field that has been thinking a lot about upscaling is the field of development, nutrition, poverty alleviation, and one of the major thinkers in that area was 20 years, 30 years of experience in upscaling innovation for development, concluded in a major piece that basically all the effective upscaling experience in his field always involved multiple actors: public governments, civil society organizations, NGOs, private businesses, and of course, local farmers, producers, etc. You always need to think about multiple stakeholders in order to succeed in your upscaling. This will never be achieved by just one category of stakeholders. That's a very fundamental truth that has been found empirically with all these upscaling experiments. And not only you need multiple stakeholders, but you need to have multiple stakeholders that are acting at different scales of intervention. Typically, if we take tropical deforestation, you need to rely on these global platforms, such as the Tropical Forest Alliance or the New York Declaration of Forest. You need this country-based alliance, some alliance between different ministries that are committed to that goal. You need some sector-based cooperation, typically these commodity roundtables on palm oil and meat and the like. And then you need this project-level intervention on the ground. So from the ground all the way to the international multilateral platform, you need the intervention. And not only you need all of them, but somehow they need to align the objectives in order to reach that upscaling that we are looking for. Quite a challenge to achieve that. Often, in our field, we've been thinking about the public governance of land as being quite separate from the private governance of land, everything that's led by companies or NGOs. And actually, when in the early days of the private governance of land, the idea is that NGOs, companies would do governance without government because the governments were viewed as ineffective, corrupt, weak states, etc. In reality, that does not work. 20 years of experience show us that there are many, many key interactions between these multiple actors. They can influence each other, enforce, cooperate, adopt, etc. And it's only once you have all this interaction that you have the level of synergies that are required for upscaling at the scale of the entire system. So thinking about these interactions is very important. Let's go a little deeper into that because it's a very important theme. what are the mechanisms through which public policies or private governance can support other forms of interventions? Well, I can distinguish 4 of them. One is what I've called absorption, what I've discussed just before. So you have some sustainability standard that has been designed by some NGO or some group of innovator, but they don't scale. Then suddenly they're fully absorbed into a public policy or into a private company. So that's what I mentioned just before. That's one. Another one is that you have this sustainability standard, but in order to be effective, you need a series of enabling conditions, supportive policies from the state. You need clear land ownership rights. You need a monitoring system. You need the rule of law. You need a level of compliance that you need sanctions for cheaters. So all these supportive conditions can be created by governments. Another configuration is what you call the carrot and stick approach. A private business provided incentives for the leaders in the field, the most progressive actors, and governments provides a threat of sanctions for the laggards, for the cheaters, for the people who are always behind. A fourth way of interaction is in the multiple policy stages. In order to successfully implement a policy, different actors can divide these tasks. The NGO or the government will do the agenda setting, the NGO will do the monitoring, the private business will do the enforcement on the ground with the farmers. So rather than assume that all these stages of a policy has to be implemented by the same actor, they just divide these roles. Okay, you do that, I do that, and together we'll get it. And of course, there's never a meeting where they sit around the table and divide these tasks. It just happens that one is good at one task because they have access to data, the other one is better at that, and eventually all these things fit together. Yet another way to look at this issue of complementarity, for any new sustainable practice to be adopted, you need 3 things. You need first a good understanding of the issue, of the problem, of the solution. So you need to circulate a lot of information, create awareness. And that's something for which civil society is especially good. Not only, a government is collecting data and companies monitor impacts in their producers, but civil society is the one who's really creating awareness about these issues. Second, if you understand the nature of the issue, you need to create the motivation to act. You need to create the incentives. And here, governments is especially well equipped to create incentives because they can change the rule of the games. They can create new laws, new regulation that incentivize some behavior and sanction others. And finally, so there's a problem, you're motivated to solve it, but now you need to have the capacity to change it. You need to be able to invest, you need to have access to the technologies, and that's why the private sector is so crucial, because they have the capacity to innovate, to implement, they have the financial power to invest in these solutions. So it's really the synergies between these different actors that will lead to change at scale. And these views that claim that governments are corrupt or companies just are terrible, they just think of profit, is not helping to find these coalitions where we kind of align these objectives. Now, what's really tough in this process is that we tend to assume that all actors are homogeneous. I've been talking about the government, the producers, the NGOs. Actually, there's much more heterogeneity within each of these categories. If we look at a typical situation, let's say some producers of soybeans somewhere in a forest environment, typically there will always be among the producers or among the companies the most progressive actors, the one with a vision, with a commitment to sustainability. Then at the other extreme, you will have always the laggards, the cheaters, they just don't care, they look for short-term profit, and all the range in between. Just all multiple tiers of companies with different attitudes with sustainability. With the traditional approach to private governance, which is purely voluntary, you just offer in a voluntary-based sustainability standard, basically all you do is that. You offer a standard, a payment for ecosystem services, an eco-certification label, and mostly the most progressive companies will do it because they are progressive. And the other ones say, I'm not doing it at all, and therefore they have a competitive advantage. They can still clear the forest illegally. They can still go into the national parks. And now these guys have to compete with these guys that don't respect the law. So that's the traditional approach. It doesn't work at scale. It works for these people who are 2 to 20% of your market. It never works for 100% or even, let's say, 80% of your market. So that's why you need a broader approach. First, you need to raise the floor for all your actors, including the laggards. And only a government policy can do that. Only a government policy can say, okay, this is the minimum thing you have to do. You cannot go into the forest if it's a protected area, etc. You cannot release some polluted water in your streams, etc. Also, you need to facilitate some emulation from these progressive companies to the other ones, to the tier 2, tier 3 companies. These progressive companies will pioneer some new standards, will do all the test and trial, will develop the infrastructure. Then it becomes easier for these guys now to say, okay, you know, they've been doing it for 20 years or 10 years, let me do it as well, because they've shown it works. They've shown it's profitable. So you need to create this emulation between actors. And you know, I mentioned the carrot and stick approach. The carrot incentive is not sufficient. You need somehow the pressure on these actors. That's where the naming and shaming campaigns occur. Now, nowadays, the NGO world mostly attack and shames the most progressive companies. It's funny, the better a company is in terms of sustainability, the more it gets attacked by the Greenpeace and the like. You know, it's always IKEA and Volvo and Nestle and L'Oreal that gets attacked because these NGO world know that they will respond. I think it's time for the world to start to focus on these second, third, fourth tier companies. And finally, you need incentives. This will not work just based on a threat of sanction or just based on altruistic values. We need to create a system where there's some incentive for these actors to move. Well, you see quite a lot of complexity. You know, how to get that right at the national scale, at the international scale, really, really difficult. How to get it right at the local scale, quite easy because, you know, you have all the actors, you know, they know each other, they interact. But then it's just local, so you don't scale. That's why the new buzzword, the new trend now in that field is to develop what is known as the jurisdictional approach. These are the sub-national commitments. A province, a state, you know, a large entity within a country that commits to be sustainable. Why jurisdictional? Because it's much easier at that scale, below the national, above the local, to create some formalized collaboration between local government entities, civil societies, companies, producers. It's just a scale where there's more denser social networks between these different actors. And then you can, through a negotiation process, try to apply some sustainability standard to all the actors at that scale, with some significant impact. So that's what we are looking at now in our current research. We've invented something like 25 credible jurisdictional approaches that try to deal with sustainable land use in the world. Some have a focus on just one commodity, palm oil typically, others mostly on carbon stocks, so forest, let's just keep some carbon into the forest here, and others really are more holistic, they deal with multiple sectors. And you see this has been growing quite a lot over the last few years. And it's quite significant. You know, overall, this 25 jurisdictional approach covers 40% of the tropical forest, quite significant. And they tend to be in areas where the rate of deforestation is higher than the average rate for the tropics. So these are our 25 jurisdictional approach that we found. This is the average rate of deforestation. And you see most of them have a rate of deforestation much higher than the average rate. That means that if this approach is successful, it will have an impact on tropical deforestation. So that's a new trend. It's too early to evaluate, but it seems to include all the attributes that will make a governance of land use successful. Okay. Time to wrap up. What did I tell you? I told you that first, we need to focus on these small solutions because they are the most likely to have an impact. But also, we need to focus on this upscaling mechanism. It's not enough just to come up with all these very nice solutions, implement with 1,000 people and claim success. That doesn't work. You need also to think about scale. That scaling is most likely to work when you develop these synergies between voluntary standards, public policies, and supply chain commitments. But doing that, you need to account for this large heterogeneity between actors. You cannot treat all NGOs, all companies, all as just one entity. There's great heterogeneity, and they will respond to different signals. And finally, it seems from what we've observed that public-private partnerships or multi-stakeholder initiatives or hybrid governance, whatever the word you want to use here, but thinking about formal cooperation between private, public, civil society actors is the key to create this transformation at scale. I've shown you multiple quotes. Let me end with one quote that should be inspiring for the current and future leaders. The ability to galvanize and convene other stakeholders to co-create effective partnership is one of the essential leadership imperatives for the current century. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Eric, for this really great talk. I think not only Eric is sweating, there is a lack of low temperature in this room.
Yeah. I was told that the ventilation only responds to CO2 levels, so we should all exhale out of CO2 and then it will kick in, yes.
We have been discussing how we could discuss this great talk, and given that time is quite advanced, we have been deciding that it's better to give Eric a chance to fill up with fresh water and have a coffee, and then you should discuss with him downstairs at the coffee break in details, as we did with the icebreaker last night. I think the talk was so extensive, it covered so really important issues. It's not really possible to make a good discussion in 3 minutes anyway here within the plenary. So I invite you to catch up with Eric downstairs at the coffee break.
Outside, where it's fresher.
Well, by now, I suppose outside it's going to be hotter than inside of the hall. Before you're leaving downstairs, let me just announce some very few things. Please get involved. Join the expert forums where you can exchange about most recent science. Then at the lunch break, be aware that we're not having any catering at the conference for lunch, but there is a multitude of places where you can go for during the lunch break, and there is a sheet of paper downstairs at the registration office where you can inform yourselves on where that would be the easiest for you around the corner. Then there is the treasure quest, which this great format, which I really love to see becoming a success, will only work when you as participants are getting in touch and involved and join in with our facilitators, with our student coaches at the Treasure Quest. I dearly hope that we can make this a great success to be shown to the university and the general public tomorrow afternoon at the Citizen Sciences speed stating. And then something which is really well in line with Eric's talk today is the KOSMOS Lecture, which is part of the KOSMOS Lecture series. The live event will be in the Hall of Senate, the Senatssaal, in the main building of Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin, just across the road. We will have a live transmission here into this room. I think the climate will be just as just as bad in the one as in the other room. But you may, if you find a place in the Senate, in the Hall of Senate, great, join us there. If that doesn't work, just come here and we will have a live transmission of the great talk on actually law and sustainability by Anne-Christin Mittwoch from Marburg University tonight at 7 p.m. in the Hall of Senate. And then again, be here on time if you wish at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, because we have another high-level speaker with a keynote given here in this auditorium, which will be Johan Rockström tomorrow morning. And I would hope that he can have the lecture hall at least as full as it is at the moment. Thank you very much for joining us on this opening ceremony. Have a great coffee break. and enjoy the upcoming 2 days.